Welcome to Beyond Just Business, the podcast for those who want more. More clarity, more direction, and potentially more meaning. We explore the thinking behind success, the habits that shape performance, and the questions that go deeper than profit margins. If you're ready to challenge the obvious and rethink the way life and business work, you are absolutely in the right place. Welcome back to another episode of Beyond Just Business. I am Andrew Rattigan, and you are?
I'm Paul Davis.
Excellent. So you didn't need a cue card this week, people. He is getting very good at what he does. So last week, if anyone missed our previous episode, we covered everything from walking your dog to not walking your dog. Anyone who's listened back can realize what that meant. And the tyranny of shoulds. This week, we are going to talk to those who are in corporate, those who are in the C-suite, who've built and forged out a career in a certain area. They've worked hard. You've gotten to the pinnacle of what it is, or near the pinnacle of what you hope to achieve. And it's important today to draw attention to the fact that too could be a lonely role, because you're trying to create something that you either had a hoped for, you had a direction that you had in your mind and where you thought it was going. So I suppose we want to acknowledge that, because there's a huge, everyone has challenges in life, Paul. I think you'd agree that no matter what area you're in, and it's choose your heart. So today, by looking at the kind of corporate element to the way people live, I would imagine and I suppose because I deal with a lot of people who are in the C-suite, I can understand both sides of it, because outside people assume ivory tower, big office, lots of support, great remuneration and everything else. But I see the weight they carry. And I think for anyone listening to this who's in that space would probably be nodding along with me, because there is a lot to it when you imagine what it took to get to a particular level and how to maintain that. So it's almost like an athletic element. You really have to have endurance.
Yeah, yeah. But what comes to mind as we were trying to settle on this one, I don't think an awful lot of them plan out what they want to get from corporate. So let that land for a couple of seconds, because I think they climb that ladder without actually developing or designing the ladder that they want to climb. So they will get promoted because some manager has either found them to be good in a particular area, or their manager has figured out, okay, I need to hang on to this person, so I'll promote them, or I'll give a salary increase, or whatever it might be. And so there'll be circumstances that have created that promotion, as opposed to the individual deciding to go after a particular promotion, or even going laterally into another department to pursue a slightly different route to get to the ladder that they do want to actually build. I think, I'm not saying this for everybody, but I think the vast majority of people it happens by happenstance, as opposed to them constructing the ladder themselves and designing the ladder that they want to build, and seeing it as a way of getting to somewhere that they want to get to, as opposed to following something that just turns up.
That's an interesting one. Expand on that a little bit, because what's funny is I would have met, most recently, I know of one who's very strategic, but equally, if you ask me to describe how they've done it, I couldn't tell you. So say a little bit more on that, just to see if that resonates with
So
people.
what I've seen quite a few times is that you'll have people within let's just say that they're aiming towards the C-suite. Okay.
Yeah.
So they may not have achieved that level as of yet, but they want to get to C-suite. But the vast majority of them will be in their own role, fulfilling their role, in the hope that they will either get promoted and be guided towards getting to C-suite. And some of them will get the tap over on the shoulder saying, look, we see you as a high potential within the organization, and we want to see you progress through the different levels. Let's just call it that way. All right. As opposed to the individuals themselves saying to themselves, okay, so what's the route that I want to go? What's the route that I want to take? And that's very different. It's a very different approach. So what I mean by that is trying to devise, okay, so what's the kind of work that you want to be doing within the organization? And in some cases, actually designing the role that you want to play within the organization. So not necessarily taking on a role that already exists, but perhaps even creating a new role that may not even exist right now at the moment, and pursuing after that role, because it ticks so many other boxes for you, as opposed to just fitting into a particular box that has been created.
See, obviously, like they'd have to be very dynamic in how they think because when you imagine there's a lot of people out there who just, you're given a particular structure to work within the confines
Yeah.
of. I suppose what I find fascinating nowadays is I'm seeing a lot of acquisitions and I'm seeing a lot of companies that are obviously either legacy pieces where people are moving on and transitioning because the next generation aren't going to take it on. But aside from the headline where it says such and such a founder exits for whatever,
Mm.
I often find myself thinking about the C-suite or the senior roles within those businesses. And oftentimes they're the ones that built the business to the level it's at because if
Yeah.
they're coming up through the ranks, whether they're being strategic, whether they're operations. And I wonder I suppose, what the transition must be like for them moving from one piece to another. Because if you're absorbed or brought into another company, the dynamic is different.
Yeah.
The workplace could be different. You could obviously you've got a lot of mandates now when it comes to back to work and whatever else. I would say it's quite a precarious. I'd say it's actually the best way to describe it. I'd say you're on an adrenaline rush all the time because you're always on. You're trying to figure out what does it mean, what's the landscape like. Is that something you're seeing at the moment?
It is because there's a huge amount of activity going on in that space. What my advice would generally be actually stepping back from that and saying, actually, okay, so now you've been given for want of a better word, a new starting line.
Yeah.
Now where do you want to go? As opposed to seeing that the only route is to merge with the company and be part of that new merge or the acquisition route or whatever it may be. And so you're not seen as being part of that future management team within the same organization. What if you're to start a new life altogether from day one?
Now, do you mean that? So, for anyone who's listening to this, do you mean that they explore leaving the position they're in, or is it that
Potentially.
they?
Yeah.
Okay, because that was
Yeah,
interesting.
potentially. Potentially.
And what do you think would be the driver behind that? Leave while things are good. So it leaves you to then strategically
It
move
is.
that.
What I've seen in a lot of acquisitions, a lot of mergers, is that the culture is different, the values are different, everybody's jockeying for position. Not everybody wins at the end of the day because literally there will always be fallout because there's
Yeah.
always duplication at that level. So therefore, you might as well. Now, sometimes you do have to stay with a company for a particular number of years because that's
Mm.
part of the agreement and so on. But using that time frame to see what your next move is, and don't think it as being you're going to be here for the next 5 or 10 years with the exact same company. Let's start afresh. Let's wipe the slate clean and say, okay, so where do you want to go? What's your next move? And that can be very different.
That's interesting. So, would you be of the opinions? This is an interesting one. So this is, I suppose, again, in the landscape that people are listening to the change in dynamics when companies are acquired. Would you see it then as essentially an opportunity, let's say for the C-suite or the senior managerial roles or director roles within a company? So, really, an acquisition, unless you are a founder, is an opportunity for someone to essentially leapfrog while everything is still good
Yeah,
and use it like someone successfully exiting. If you can
yeah,
be acquired, like we
yeah.
know a lot of people who have companies that were floundering, they were acquired. They might have either gotten a nominal sum or nothing, but
Hmm.
the concept of being acquired meant that they could then start again or jump
Yeah,
off into a more senior role or a better role. Would you say that? I would say actually, now that you say that, that must apply to a huge number of people because if you're in a business and you are part of that legacy, you're being thrown in, and the show that comes to mind is Succession, where you're literally thrown in
yeah,
a boardroom full of people. You mean nothing to them because you
yeah,
haven't built that rapport with them yet. You are just a number with a name
yeah.
above it.
Exactly. Especially when equity is involved. But let me put it to you this way. An awful lot of people that, especially our founders and the
Mm,
founders of the company, they're the entrepreneurs. So they're the ones that have the vision, have the idea, want to get from A to Z as quickly as possible. Not so great at implementing, not so great at when a company gets to a particular size, not great at continuing on because bottom line is their internal drivers are it's not what they want to do. They want to start, they want to initiate, they want to be a pioneer.
mm.
That's what drives them, not the continuation, not the monotony.
So it's like a wartime general type of thing.
Yeah, they want to, and it's a bit like, and everybody has a sense of that anyway, but it's just more heightened in that particular caliber of individuals.
So if we're talking, this is interesting. So if we assume, let's step away a little bit from the founder bit, but let's look at the idea of those supporting senior roles that have been pivotal in helping someone grow, scale. Let's say you have a company that brings in someone, they get to a stage. We all know of companies that the founder then transitions a new CEO who can then take on those roles. They can deal with board interactions, they can deal with the equity, and they can deal with all that kind of stuff in that next transitional piece. So
Mm.
let's look at the pivotal roles within that space. When you look at them, It must be quite an interesting space to be in because you're leaving something. I don't know if you've seen it. There's the movie on BlackBerry, the movie that it's
I haven't
based on
watched it.
this
No, I haven't
story of
watched
BlackBerry.
it. No.
Very interesting because you've got this bunch of ragtag guys that are all there. Then they're folded into this big fancy place that has an office. And
Right.
they've gone from moving fast, being agile, and being fun
Hmm.
to then being in a space where it's not the same. But if you're looking at those senior roles, how would someone almost get a sense check or evaluate their role going forward? Because let's say if I'm in Radigan Inc. now
Hmm.
and I'm on the verge of being acquired, I get a good package and I've got a 3 year earnout, let's say, and I've got five key personnel that are there. Yeah, they might make a few quid, they might not, but they've been well remunerated for the last 5 to 10 years. When I'm transitioning out, they may be key to what I do.
Potentially.
So
Yeah, potentially.
what, how would someone who's in that C-suite feel that they can either strategize around being a part of that next transition or strategize their way out of it? Now, I know this conversation is going a little bit more into business, but I think it's important that we do give that level of those in business an opportunity to maybe get them thinking in a different way as well.
I think the vast majority of the time, and again, I never work on absolutes, but
Yeah.
that's just another absolute never. But the vast majority of the time, people are better off transitioning out, not staying.
If you're to put a percentage on it of people you've worked with, what would you say
They won't transition because it's too safe for them
in the short term?
in the short term. Yeah. But I can guarantee you, a number of years down the road, that they're sorry they made that decision to stay. And that's 100% of the case in those scenarios.
Really?
So it'd be about 50-50 that would actually transition and move out.
Yeah.
But the ones that stay are resent the decision that they made. And
Which
now
is
they're
funny,
they're
yeah.
they're, they're starting again, maybe 5 years down the road, which
So
again,
the last 5 years.
yeah, they have, yeah, yeah,
It's such an interesting dynamic because, like, even the founders that I meet that have exited companies, and I think probably they say, like, even the founders themselves, and this is probably where people overlook the role of when you do something on your own, you can do, yes, you are nimble, yes, you can make decisions, you don't have a committee you have to put it by. But then as companies grow, that senior role that actually is pivotal to someone's transition going from the childhood to teenage years, surviving the teenage transition, and then becoming a mature company that's a viable
mm,
exit. It fascinates me because they're the ones that without them, they could have been absolutely key cornerstones to creating this opportunity by virtue of their experience of what they do. Now, like you said, bring them in when it's messy and it's the childhood equivalent of business and they can't do it, but give them the structure and they thrive within those confines.
yeah,
But then when it transitions out, I think people focus on the founder being having the difficult time. So built it. I no longer have as much of a say as I did. And I do think that there is an inherent, not necessarily resentment, but probably a come down.
yeah.
Once the money lands, they then realize that it's not their baby
It's
anymore.
exactly that. It's no longer a baby. Yeah, exactly that. Yeah.
And yeah, I find myself empathizing with those in those senior roles. Because when you think about being rewarded, the person who sold would hopefully be well rewarded, got what they want,
Mhm.
whatever else. And then the support element, not that I'm not saying people get left in the lurch. We're not saying
But there
C-suites
is
are
very little support.
charity.
Yeah, but there is very little support. And even for the people that are in the C-suite, but even the people that are below that as well, there is actually very little support because, again, in the corporate world, it's not seen to have your own individual that's bringing you from a mindset perspective. It's
Yeah.
very few and far between. So you're
See,
actually having those conversations on your own, in your own head. You can't discuss them with anybody around the board because you're any sign of weakness at that level, that's it. You're
taken
gone.
out.
Yeah. And again, it's very different from some people will have a mentor or a coach or whatever might be in some, but
Mm.
that's, I'm not saying it's completely different, but it is very slightly different to dealing with the mindset side of things because there's an awful lot. Let me put it this way. It's exactly the same as what everybody else experiences, but it's amplified. It's 100 times bigger because now we're dealing with bigger numbers, bigger threats, bigger worries, bigger concerns. It's just gotten bigger. That's all it is. But they're the exact same things. So it'll be down to confidence, down to self-belief, it'll be down to imposter syndrome, all the above that everybody else experiences. It's just more amplified because of the position that they hold.
And what's interesting is when you think of that performance element, that like even to show Billions, there's a psychiatrist who's in the office and like
That's
she's
right. Yeah.
fully employed, she has shares in the business, whatever. But
Yeah.
that's a key factor in the performance of all the staff. Now, obviously, it's a cutthroat business. They all know they're there
Yeah.
to make money. Your man acts as like he's great at what he does, whatever else, but everyone's expendable, whatever. But there's a key thing he understands, which is the importance of her. And throughout all the series, you see her role become elevated in how she can get people back from the brink, get them focused, get them performing. Now, there's an egotistical, individualistic approach to that, which is I want to make sure you're okay, so you keep making me money. Like it's not a
You
case
can,
of I
yeah,
want to make
but
sure you're okay for
yeah,
you.
but it's a win-win situation though.
Yes,
If you
yeah.
look at Formula One, and so there's two drivers right now at the moment that aren't doing that great in the McLaren team. And if you look at, so every single one of them have a mindset coach. And every single one of them, because a lot of that, yes, there's the skill, and you look at Lewis Hamilton and so on, he's been in there for years. God only knows when he's going to retire, but he's been racing for years. But yeah, you got the pit crew trying to slice microseconds off the actual time that they're spending in the pit itself. There's the actual car itself, and there's all that aspect of it, looking at the statistics and so on. But the vast majority of it is down to mindset. That driver is not in the right frame of mind as they're going around and doing 55 laps at that level of speed, that level of intensity. You're not going to win the race. You absolutely will not win the race.
Mm.
So some industries have it. Golf has have them as well, but in the corporate world, very few. In America, it's more acceptable because that's just how business is done in America. But in Ireland, absolutely like minuscule number of people, number of companies don't have it. Again, just in my experience. But it's the pivotal role of getting somebody performing at their A game.
Do you think it's something now that people are more exposed to that if someone's in a certain space, like I suppose the type of people I would tend to deal with are people who are used to investing, i.e., investing their time in a coach, in a good
Mm.
stylist, whatever it might be. Do you think that mindset now, because like when you even think of, there are a lot of things we've learned from America that when you look at the role of the function of sales in Ireland and Europe has become more prominent in terms of how it's talked about. But historically, sales would have been a dirty word. It would have been
Yeah,
associated with you're a salesman. What are you
yeah,
talking about? It wouldn't have been held in the same regard as the parish priest and the local solicitor. And ironically, that's the lifeblood of everything. Like whether
yeah.
you're selling your kids on eating vegetables or selling someone on whatever.
The business doesn't exist without it.
Yeah. So I wonder when you think of mandating that mindset element to a lot of people, are people coming around to it, or is there an element of,
Very,
um,
very slowly, and the reason being is because they're trying to, or not that they're trying to, it's they somewhat immediately think about mental health, and it's very different.
James Gandolfini style in The Sopranos? He's going to see a shrink, and everyone thinks
Yeah,
it's the absolute thing he has to keep from everybody because that's
yeah,
weak.
yeah. But it's not about that at all. It's absolutely not about that. There's an element of it, but no, it's knowing which gets back to, okay, so if somebody's going to transition from a corporate, whether it's because it's taken over, it's merged or whatever it might be and so on, or it's just their time that they want to move, it's actually looking back on what is it that you absolutely are amazing at doing that nobody else can do. And that's the question people should really ask themselves and say, okay, so what is it that I do that nobody else can do? Now you're getting into the real crux of it. And then when you find that, now you pursue that route, and now you can bring that alchemy to any other business that you want to do, because nobody else can do it.
It's a very interesting dynamic because when you look at the role of how these things play out, anyone who's watched any shows or anything where it involves politics or trying to survive or get around, like when you think of House of Cards, and you're looking at it from afar and it was a show and it seemed that can't happen. And then you realize that there's an interplay in that in everything we do. You have a conversation with one person who tries to land you in it
Yeah.
by saying, "Oh, you agree with that?" You're like, "What? I don't know what just happened." And then suddenly it unfolds.
Mm.
You have someone else in an area where they're trying to allude to someone being a certain way they shouldn't, whatever it may be. It's got to be extraordinarily taxing on someone with a particular skill set. But also, what I find interesting is adjusting to the air in a certain area. So
Mm.
let's say if you've got someone who's a partner or is they go from partner to managing partner or director to whatever, I'd be fascinated to know if they were in a safe conversation where you knew it would go anywhere, nowhere, as to what were the biggest things that, if you're in base camp in Everest and then they move it up a level,
Mm.
maybe these are minute changes, but the actual dynamics are huge. And I'd love to know someone has to have those chairs you sit down, you can't actually see their face. And it's like confessions of a C-suite executive. It's like, I took the role thinking it was X. Yeah, I made 20 grand more, but they took 50 grand of my time. Or I didn't realize I'd be exposed to this. Like strategic outsourcing almost of blame. So,
Yes.
you hire somebody, go, "Oh, what's the bottom line? It's going to cost 150 grand to get this person up to a certain level, but they've got someone new to blame." And someone else goes, I got promoted. And the office guy goes, we got someone to sign the bits of paper at the because like that's the stuff. And I think I empathize with that element of it because when you look at individual business owners and operators, yes, it can be lonely. Yes, you can be on your own and you may not feel you have those supports. But I would say there's an equal difficulty, challenge, and frustration for those who are at that level.
It is, yeah. It's in some respects it's more intense because now they've got, apart from the competitors and the customers that they have to keep happy and the shareholders and the investors, and they have to perform quarter and quarter. So the intensity is absolutely massive, but they've also got their peer group or their supposed peer group that they have to be constantly looking over their shoulder at. Because not again, absolute, the vast majority of them are out to kill each other, metaphorically.
You heard that, listener. Metaphorically, we're not endorsing murder or any kind of games. So if we were to round this conversation off and leave someone who's potentially in the C-suite or at that higher level or senior level with either a thought, a concept, or an exercise, what would it be?
I think it probably extends to below C-suite as well, as in somebody maybe building their career with it within the corporate. And because the same thing will apply, I think you've got to look at what is the ladder you want to build, to be quite honest. Because again, the vast majority will just follow the ladder, just climb that ladder, but they're not actually designing the ladder they want themselves. And they get mentored by people that are within the organization as opposed to outside the organization, which is another thing. You've got to question that aspect of it as well. So it is a case of where do you want to end up? Where does the top of the ladder lead to? And is that where it leads to, is that something that you're actually really going to enjoy doing? Because is it tapping into your unconscious blueprint, which is what I keep talking about, and into what drives you internally, as opposed to what you perceive you should be doing.
That's an interesting way of looking at it. Nothing more for me to say on that. I think that's a great way to leave it, Paul. So, first and foremost, it's been a great season two. This is our last episode of season two. So, onwards to the next one. But we'd like to thank you, the listener, for taking the time to listen to the various episodes. And we hope you've gotten great value from these conversations. As always, we always want to grow, we always want to improve. So, if anyone has any topics that they would covered or discussed, feel free to reach out to us separately, or you can send an email to hello@beyondjustbusiness.com. We would like to encourage those who are listening to this to share it with family, friends, and colleagues that they think would get some value from it. And the key indicator behind what we want from this podcast is getting people thinking beyond the norm, beyond the now, and beyond just business. But there's so much more you can achieve in so many ways. And we hope to give you a few ideas that you can explore, lean into, and maybe learn a little something, as we're always learning something new every day. So thank you for listening, and thank you very much, Paul. I've really enjoyed season two.
Thank you. It's been absolute pleasure, and it's been really enjoyable going into these conversations and diving deeper. It's nothing better than diving deeper, to be honest with you, into the subject matter and these conversations.
Well, there you go. You said it, Paul. So thank you for listening, and we'll catch you in season three. And that's it for another episode of Beyond Just Business. If it gave you something to think about, or it helped you see things a little differently, we're delighted. But make sure you're following so you don't miss out on the next episode. Stay curious, keep questioning, and we will see you next time.